Hello, hi friends. My name is Ashley Aireonna. Welcome back to my show. Today I am joined by Rohan, just like last week. So I hope you guys are all having a great Friday afternoon. And hi Rohan, how are you doing? How's your morning, afternoon going?
Going good, going good. Appreciate it, and
Good.
glad to be back.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. Well, today I want to get into the upcoming Vikings game on Monday Night Football. Feel like we could play the fun over under game that we did really terribly at last week. Um, Also wanted to ask you about, I read your article about some trade rumors, but before we get into all that, I haven't seen you since last week, so I have to ask because we were feeling pretty confident last Friday, and the mood around the fan base might have changed a little bit. We talked about Brock Purdy and his MVP race. We were feeling really good. You with a lot of confidence in your chest talked about the upcoming game and how crucial Kittle was going to be. So I just wanted to get into your thoughts, how you've been this week, just really quickly on that Browns game, and specifically on Brock Purdy. Do you think it's time for people to be panicking? How have you felt, especially now with some days to kind of process everything that's happened? Obviously, there was weather, one of the best, if not the best, defense in the league right now. How are you feeling about Brock Purdy going into this Vikings game and after that Browns game last week?
Yeah, I think when you look at it, it's somewhat of a wake up call. I do think that a lot of people have said a couple of things, and I agree with a lot of takes. First of all, I think that it's important to know what Brock Purdy has done over the first 5 weeks of the season, which was the MVP caliber play that we had seen from the quarterback position, something the 49ers aren't necessarily used to, especially in weeks 4 and weeks 5. The Arizona Cardinals, I thought that game was good. The Dallas Cowboys, I thought that performance was good as well. So when you look at the body of work, I thought Brock Purdy had a really good first 5 weeks. So if you take if you take into account the first 5 weeks in accordance with the bad week 6, you give him the benefit of the doubt. However, I do think that it's important to take in how Brock Purdy played, because you do have to understand the different ways that quarterbacks adjust to different defenses. And the Cleveland Browns were the best defense San Francisco faced all year. I don't think you can discount that. And Purdy was under pressure. He certainly was under pressure, but there was also issues in clean pockets that was the most, not surprising, but the most eye opening to me. He was only 8 of 15 passing in clean pockets. The interception came on a clean pocket. It's just him missing. He just flat out missed receivers in this game. Again, you give him the benefit of the doubt, but this is one where you keep it in the back of your mind, because dating back to the offseason, my main take on why I didn't think the 49ers would win a Super Bowl in 2023 was because, well, I said it was primarily due to the quarterback play, and I didn't think Brock Purdy would play bad. I thought, though, primarily, I didn't think they were going to be able to win the big game. They could reach the Super Bowl. They could reach the NFC Championship game like they've done in years past. I just don't know if they were going to be able to finish the task, understanding that to get there, you're going to have to go through tough defense after tough defense, like you did with the Cleveland Browns. I mean, Philly's got a good defense. You look on the other side, Kansas City's got a solid defense. And there are several solid defenses on the elite teams. Usually, elite teams are good both ways. And so that's something you do have to keep into mind. The one thing I'll say, I'm going to give Brock the benefit of the doubt. You do want to see, how does he respond. You saw it very briefly at the end of the game. He still led, a potential game-winning drive prior to the missed field goal, which is a good sign. But you want to see him build with a better performance so that you can see some more consistency and see him able to bounce back from a tough moment.
I definitely agree. I was wondering, do you think that the rain might have had a bigger deal to do with his performance than we kind of thought? I was listening to something and realized that the other time that we've seen Brock Purdy look like human and kind of struggle was actually last year in the playoffs against the Seahawks in that first quarter when it was raining. I know Brock Purdy does have some physical limitations. I think his hand size is in the 24th percentile of all quarterbacks, meaning that like 76% of quarterbacks have larger hands than him. So maybe my hypothesis is like, even on the clean pockets, he might have, by that point, like at the end of the game when he threw the interception, maybe he was anticipating pressure. So it could be a little bit mental, but also I wonder if there was that physical aspect of just dealing with the wet footballs. Do you think that that is a concern because the playoffs are going to be in the winter? Weather is going to be a factor where you're talking about having a Super Bowl winning quarterback. Eventually, you're going to have to play a good defense. Eventually, you're going to have to play in poor weather.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think you can make an argument, but I don't think the weather was as influential as just the play poor being flat out. He was inaccurate. It's not like he made terrible decisions. He was just inaccurate with his ball placement. A lot of throws behind receivers, some throws overthrowing receivers. The timing seemed off at times. You can attribute it to the weather, and I think the weather aspect, I think you have to attribute it more to his hand size, because the issue when it comes to the quarterback position in smaller hands is being able to grip the football in strange weather scenarios. I also didn't think it was raining that hard, so I'm not going to put a big emphasis on it overall. But again, that's another thing where you have to take into account in bad weather games. You got a quarterback who doesn't have the biggest hands, and I pointed this out on Ryan G. Henley's show the other day. How his hand size is pretty small. I believe it's 9.25 inches, which, like you pointed out, is in the 24th percentile of quarterbacks. I think that's something you have to know, and it's something you got to keep in mind. But overall, I'm not going to attribute the weather too much in this performance. Just overall, thought he just flat out missed receivers.
Okay, I have a follow-up question just because I've been reading some articles and stuff. A lot of people think that maybe the Browns could have written like a book on Brock Purdy. Now, my takeaway is I don't think that people will be able, or other teams will be able to follow the Browns' defensive strategy because they don't have the same personnel that the Browns do. But some teams might, or might not have like as good as the Browns personnel, but might have comparable comparable players at specific positions where they feel more confident playing man coverage. So a lot of people have talked about how man coverage could have been maybe Brock Purdy's kryptonite and really spooked him. Kyle Shanahan and just the Shanahan scheme, like if you're looking at LaFleur, McVay, they've always done a really good job against zone defense. My hypothesis for why so many people in this, or so many quarterbacks within the Shanahan scheme throw insane interceptions to like linebackers, where if you're an audience member watching the game, you're like, how could you throw it there? I think a lot of the Shanahan scheme is training your quarterback to throw to specific spots. And I think in the headset, they used to talk about this with Jared Goff when he was with the Rams, that Sean McVay would actually tell him before the ball snap where to throw the ball. And I think if you look back at Jimmy G, maybe that's possible that he was kind of told, like, there's going to be an open guy here, so I'm throwing to this spot. And he didn't really process after the ball was snapped, hey, whatever Kyle said in my headset is no longer accurate. The defense found out, and now there's going to be a linebacker there. So I was kind of wondering, do you think that maybe that is why Brock Purdy struggled, because he had to wait for the ball to be snapped in order to figure out which receiver would win their matchup? Also, the Browns had really good secondary play that were able to cover the offensive weapons that weren't injured for the 49ers. So do you think man coverage is a problem? And do you think maybe, I've always given Brock Purdy a lot of credit for like the between the eyes, being able to assess the defense. Do you think maybe he actually struggles with that? Or I don't know if struggle, but doesn't excel as much as we might have anticipated. And him struggling against man coverage could have shown that to the rest of the league.
I think, yeah, that's a complex question, and I think I'll break it down into parts. One, you talk about the Browns personnel. I think the Browns personnel argument's a good argument, right? The Browns don't have similar personnel to the remainder of the league, in that they got a very good front four, but they also have very good corners. They have the best trio of corners in the NFL in Denzel Ward, Martin Emerson, and Greg Newsome, in that they are able to fit the man coverage scheme that Jim Schwartz is putting out there as a defensive coordinator. You also have the four down linemen. I mean, Jordan Elliott and Dalvin Tomlinson are good run defending defensive tackles who were just disrupting all afternoon long against those interior guys. The interior guys had a rough day for the 49ers on that offensive line. I mean, Myles Garrett type of things. Zadarius Smith did, a couple of things as well. And it's the way that they incorporated it. You had a lot of stunts. I saw they attacked that right side of the offensive line with a lot of stunts, which left free rushers coming up over the middle. And obviously, where is Brock Purdy looking to throw? Where is his eyes kind of dedicated?
Can I interject
Go
really
ahead.
quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I get nervous doing this because I want to know everything, but I realize I just don't know everything, and I've been making all my friends who also don't know everything watch my streams. Can you
Go ahead.
explain what you just meant by they had stunts? Can
Yeah.
you explain what you mean? Thank you.
Yeah, so essentially, maybe they had a four-man front on some, five-man fronts on other, where you have four down linemen. And so let's take the lineman on on the right side of the offensive line, right?
Yeah.
So the guy in the middle stunts by he kind of takes the outside gap, and in doing so he's essentially going in between the guard and the tackle instead of the regular gap is the guard and the center. It's essentially going from the A gap to the B gap, and in doing so he takes his offensive lineman, the guy who's kind of defending him, with him, but
Yeah.
he's also taking the tackle with him because he's pushing in that direction. That
Okay.
allows the outside guy then to loop around and come over the middle, where the initial offensive guard or the center who was initially going to pick up this guy, but then he passed it over to the guy to his right.
Yeah.
He then has to pick up the incoming the incoming lineman. And it's tough because usually when you're looking pre-snap, you're not expecting the stunt on every play, so you're expecting to block your assignment, the guy in front of you
Yeah.
or the guy who's coming into the gap in front of you. And so a stunt makes that hard because they're essentially trying to trick you by having you pick up one defender, which allows the other defender to run free based on where the alignment of the defensive lineman and the offensive lineman is. So that's kind of what they're trying to do. And the Cleveland Browns did this a lot.
And
The
they were
49ers
doing
do
that
this
on
better.
the 49ers right side too, to like Colton McKivitz and everything
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. And so one play I remember is Zadarius Smith was on the outside. They have two defensive tackles. They slant the defensive tackles to the right side. Then they have the Zadarius Smith curl from all the way from the outside over two defenders to the middle. And so the center, he's not looking at Zadarius Smith at all. But his responsibility becomes Zadarius Smith because everything is slanting to over to the right side, whereas this guy is now coming over the middle instead of him initially defending the defensive tackle. And so that's kind of where the alignment kind of goes along. And so it's certain things like that. And it's much easier when you're watching the film to kind of like
Yeah.
pinpoint it and break it down rather than hearing it out loud. And
Yeah.
so that's something I like to do. But that's just one example of a stunt. And there's different ways that they can do it. You can do it with linebackers. You can do it just with your defensive line. You can do it a lot. And the 49ers like to do that a lot because they have such powerful guys. One guy you'll see, for example, on Randy Gregory's first snap, he was lined up on the outside of Javon Hargrave. Hargrave was in the middle. Hargrave, then he's on the left side of the offensive line. He goes to his right. He takes the guard he takes the guard and the tackle alongside him. The tackle who's initially guarding Gregory, he is now occupied by Hargrave, and so Gregory loops
Clears the
around
pathway for him.
he loops around, and it's too late for the offensive lineman to recover. Gregory has a line to the quarterback, and he ends up going to get the sack.
Okay, perfect. I definitely was following along. Really, we'll get back to Brock Purdy, but really quickly, do you think that playing man coverage, having all those funds, is that something that is specific to the the Browns were able to do because their other players are so good? Like, I'm not really worried about the Vikings defense playing man coverage because I think the 49ers offensive weapons will fare well against the Vikings secondary players in ways that they might have not been able to do against the Browns. Is that the same thing with the stunts that you're currently talking about? For the 49ers, for example, I feel like they've been trying to do that with Jerick Jackson, but it hasn't been working because he wasn't, no offense, performing well enough. And now with a guy like Randy Gregory, we're seeing, your personnel on those things does matter.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that these things are also it's timing. You gotta call them only at certain portions, otherwise the offensive line will expect it. And on your point about man coverage, I think man coverage, it absolutely depends on your personnel because you need good man cover corners, but you also need a solid pass rush in order to be able to play tight at the line of scrimmage, because the pass rush needs to get there so the quarterback doesn't have enough time to connect with his receivers downfield or allow him to go through the entirety of his progression. Because when you're tight in coverage as opposed to off in coverage, there's a greater chance chance that you're going to allow a bigger completion down the field because it gives, there's less room for error. Whereas like if you make a misstep, the guy's already behind you. Whereas if you're in off coverage and you make a misstep, you still have time to recover and things like that. And so I think that it's dependent on the scheme and the personnel. But the main issue that I see is when you look at elite teams, most of the elite teams have strong, defensive fronts and solid coverage. For example, the Philadelphia Eagles, they've got a good defensive line. I mean, you talk about incumbents like Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham. Those guys are still there. Josh Sweat he had over 10 sacks last year. Then you add Jalen Carter, who's been really good, in his rookie season, as well as a run stuffer in Jordan Davis. You've got a strong, defensive front there of several guys who can rotate in and be an impactful guy. And then you've got Darius Slay and James Bradbury on the outside, who are pretty darn good in coverage, in that combination. And so
I heard
it's
they're in
another.
the market. I
Go
heard
ahead.
they're in the market. I heard they're in the market for Buda Baker too, which is just
Yeah, I mean, they could
just
do
like
that.
the rich keep getting richer in Philadelphia. Yeah. I can't
I mean, they
believe
could do that. They're known to
got
swing some
Carter.
deals here and there, so that could be
Yeah,
happening.
yeah. But so I agree when it comes to teams like the Eagles. I think that the concerns that we saw against the Browns might come up again. But I am not super concerned about the Vikings game coming up. I do not think that their personnel is as scary on their defensive or offensive side. They have really, really struggled against the run. They're, I think, 17th or middle of the pack against the pass. And offensively, they've been kind of middle of the road, but those stats are skewed because they're 30th in the league in their ability to run the ball. And I think they're 17th in their passing ability, but those stats contain a lot of games that Justin Jefferson was in, and Justin Jefferson is currently injured with a hamstring injury. So I am feeling pretty confident that this could be a bounce back game for Brock Purdy. Do you anticipate that the Vikings are going to try to play man coverage? Do you think that they're going to give Brock Purdy any trouble, or do you think that this will be, the 49ers might have had their wake up call and could go into this game feeling pretty good?
When you talk about the Minnesota Vikings, I honestly think their defense has improved from last year. Last year, their defense was horrendous. They just won a ton of one-score games, especially against the run. Their defense was pretty bad. They're like average this year, somewhere around their average, and that's what their record indicates as well. To me, when I look at their defense, the number one thing that stands out is the pressure. I mean, the blitz rate. Brian Flores, who's their defensive coordinator, he's been a huge blitz guy, even dating back to his Miami days, and he blitzes at a high rate. I believe it's above 50,
20%.
somewhere, 20% on third downs, which is, or he has cover zero blitzes on 20% of third downs, which is insane. The cover zero blitz is where you send everybody and it's just one-on-one coverage across the board. And so, he blitzes at a high rate. And so you might expect, different stunts, different pressures from the Minnesota Vikings in order to try and protect their secondary. But the 49ers, their operative is to get the ball out quick, try and, get these quick slants going, try and get these quick passes out in space over the middle of the field. And that's where I think they're going to try and operate and try and set Brock Purdy up with some easier throws as he, acclimates himself back. I think this is a game where you can set Brock Purdy up with some easier throws. And of course, it'll be dependent on the personnel you have out on the field. We don't know if Christian McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel, Trent Williams will be out there. But I do think this is the game where you can set Brock Purdy up with some easier throws and things like that. That Minnesota Vikings defense, it's all right. I don't think it's bad necessarily, but they lost, a good run stuffer in Dalvin Tomlinson. No Zadarius Smith there anymore. They're missing a couple of pieces on that defensive line, which has forced them to amp up the pressure a little more alongside Danielle Hunter.
Really quick with you were talking about, my brain just blanked, so sorry. Hold on, I'm gonna answer some comments really quick. I saw a guy say missing field goals, come on. I don't think that I'm personally definitely concerned about Jake Moody coming up. How are you feeling about Jake Moody? I think I'm not super concerned about him in the Vikings game, but much like how I feel like we might have learned something about Brock Purdy's ability to face man coverage, I am kind of concerned about Jake Moody's ability to handle pressure. I think it was on not Niners Nation, but the new channel that Rob Stats Guerrera has, Levin Black was pointing out something, and it's that Jake Moody in college had a really good record of making, I think it was like almost all of his kicks at home, but on the road, he really struggled. He made like 60 something percent of his kicks on the road. And if you think about road environments in college, they're way more mentally tough because people are in the stands, instead of cheering for you to make the field goal, they're trying to make you miss. A lot more pressure in those games. So I'm kind of concerned with Jake Moody when it comes to his ability to handle pressure. I know that the 49ers, when they were scouting him, said that they kind of assimilated pressure, but I don't think you can really assimilate pressure well. If I think about myself and I'm maybe doing something and I'm like, okay, if something goes wrong, this is how I'm going to handle it, and I kind of feel confident in my ability to do that. But you don't actually know how you're going to handle the situation until you're in the situation. So I kind of feel like maybe the 49ers should have looked more at like how he actually handled pressurized games, which he did not do well in games with like I said, on the road he had a much worse percentage of field goals and extra points made. So I'm kind of concerned about concerned about Jake Moody in high stakes games going forward, which is a bit disappointing because I think even though he was brought in to be a younger, cheaper version of Robbie Gould and has a stronger leg, we know that Robbie Gould was at least consistent in those high pressure moments. And for a Super Bowl caliber team, to me, that's what's most important. I don't think that the Niners would have a ton of problems maybe getting closer to field goal or like closer. But yeah, I think in those gotta have it moments, you need to be able to have a reliable guy that's not in his head. So I'm hoping that he's not in his head. I know after the game he said his teammates and stuff were really supportive. Uh, Fred Warner came out and said it wasn't his fault. We made a lot of mistakes. But then on the Fred Warner podcast, which I didn't listen to all of, but listened to like literally 5 minutes of, but his wife was going in on Jake Moody. She was like, it was very fan. She was
Dang.
like, she was like,
Okay.
yeah, you guys made mistakes, but you guys came back at the very end. You put yourself in a position to win, and he made like she was like, and I was like, can you imagine being Jake Moody and your teammate? Like who's over there being like, we got your back, and then his wife is just like, I was so mad, like she was heated. That was kind of crazy. How do you feel about Jake Moody in these high pressure? You know what I mean? We're in Philadelphia, gotta have it field goal. How do you feel like he makes that?
I mean, like I said about Brock Purdy, with a guy who made his first 9 field goals of the year, you give him the benefit of the doubt, correct? But the issue with Jake Moody and the reason why I have a lot more concern for him than I do for Brock Purdy is because of the margin of error at the positions. At quarterback, there's margin for error and there's room for growth and there's room for development. At kicker, there is not room for development. There's not margin for error because you can't just allow, a kicker to develop. If you allow a kicker to develop and allow him to go through and miss some field, go through his growing pains, well, you're costing yourself a couple of games. The 49ers have now lost already 1 game due to their kicking woes. And he's not the only reason they lost. He's not maybe the primary reason they lost. They should have easily won this game. But he is, at the end of the day, they put the game in his hands and he didn't convert. And it was a relatively easy field goal. He missed 2 on the day overall. And at the kicker position, this is one where you can't afford mistakes because the difference between this is the analogy I always use. The difference between, the 1 seed and the 2 seed or the 2 seed and a wild card team, which gives you, an extra home game in the playoffs is 1 or 2 games. And right now the 49ers are 1 game down and you can't afford to lose more games due to kicking woes. Luckily, Moody hasn't been in a place in a high leverage situation before this game to where the 49ers had to rely on that. But it's unfortunate that the first high leverage situation that he faces, he missed. And so you do wonder what it does to a man's confidence, especially at that position. And you do wonder how much that impacts head coach Kyle Shanahan and the way that he operates offensively on 4th downs in the
I
red
wonder
zone
if
or
he'll
in
be
that
more
territory.
aggressive.
Yeah. Are you
It
more
could be
aggressive?
good. It could
I
be
mean,
good
it
for
could
him
be, but
being.
that's also showing a lack of confidence in your kicker. And so,
Oh, that's true. And then
overall,
that maybe gets in his head more. Oh, so it's like
Overall, you
a.
got to think about it in a lot of ways. And this isn't a situation the 49ers should have been in. And unfortunately for Moody, the talk about not only drafting him in the 3rd round, but going with a rookie kicker over, a veteran kicker who's done it before, as other teams have done, that's going to carry with him. And the 49ers had a lot of opportunities to upgrade their roster in the third round and instead chose to make a kicker selection. Again, like I said, benefit of the doubt is there, but at a much lower margin than you do at quarterback, given the importance of kicker and you need him to win now.
I completely agree. In the third round they could have drafted an offensive lineman, and currently we're going to get to it in a little bit. But currently, Trent Williams and Aaron Banks didn't practice yesterday, so you would really hope that they would have, maybe fortified that position more instead of getting a kicker. But we're not going to go back to draft night now. I did remember when my brain blanked earlier what I was talking about. We were talking about the blitz and Brock Purdy, and that Brian Flores blitzes at a super high rate compared to the rest of the league. And my brain at first kind of went to the Giants game where Brock Purdy was blitzed, I think like 80 something percent of the time. They just sent the blitz the whole time. Even his first game in the NFL against Miami, they also blitzed him a ton. And he actually has performed really well against the blitz. Now, the only issue is, I think a big reason he's performed really well is against the blitz, you have to get the ball out really quick. And he has checked it down to Christian McCaffrey over and over again in those situations. And Christian McCaffrey has been able to turn, a 1 yard dump off into 5, 6, 8 yards. So do you think that Brian Flores will keep with his strategy to blitz Purdy a lot? And how do you think maybe Kyle Shanahan, are you anticipating Debo playing? Are you anticipating him getting Kittle involved? I know that they kind of did that against Dallas for some dump off passes. Who, if Christian McCaffrey has to sit, which we don't know if he will yet or not. The 49ers are being kind of coy with that right now, but he didn't practice. So just for a hypothetical game, if Christian McCaffrey is out, do you think that blitz is going to be more concerning for Brock Purdy than it would have been?
Yeah, I do think that when you look at what Minnesota will do, I absolutely think they got a blitz, because the way to create some disruption is trying to get pressure on him, right? Try and put him in those unfavorable situations, and I mean the blitz is going to be that way, because outside of Danielle Hunter, you wonder how Minnesota is going to get there in terms of their sack rate. I mean, they have a solid sack rate; they're 13th in the NFL, around 8%. Danielle Hunter is the primary guy there, and he's going to have a good matchup if he's lined up, on that side against Colt McKivitz. Even if he's lined up against a hobble Trent Williams, it's going to be a fun matchup to watch. But I do think that, they're going to try and create more one-on-one opportunities for him. And the way to do that is sending more rushers so that San Francisco has to deal with more players. It also tries to help out their guys on the back end. And that, if you get home, you don't have to cover, you don't have to be in coverage for that long. And so that's something that I think they'll definitely try and do. Interested to see what Brock Purdy's response to it is, but in general, Brock Purdy has shown that he can overcome the blitz at times. You look at week 3 when he was blitzed 85, 86% of the time. I mean, his confidence never wavered, and he was able to win that game pretty handedly, 30-12. Numbers didn't look great, and at times it was shaking the first quarter, but overall, I thought his response was pretty impressive, and that's what you're going to try and look for again. I mean, you're going to try and see a good response here from Purdy, because that's probably what you're going to expect.
I agree. And I think with the week, there's a difference in adjusting to injury during game versus having a whole week to prepare. So even though Kyle Shanahan is going to be coy with the media because he obviously wants the Vikings to prepare for Christian McCaffrey because that's going to take a ton of defensive time, he will know and the team will know whether or not Christian McCaffrey, Debo, Trent Williams, all these players are going, and they will have plenty of time to scheme, other guys wide open. I would hope that they would get George Kittle more involved if a guy like Christian McCaffrey wasn't playing, because I think that they need to get their yak guys more involved against the blitz. Obviously, stretch them down the field, get some deep throws to Ayuk every once in a while to make sure that they're not like that they make sure that they're defending the entire field. But I think with that high blitz percentage, that it would be very smart of them to kind of utilize these yak guys that don't always go off. And it's kind of hilarious that George Kittle can have 3 touchdowns one game and then not even 3 targets the next game. But Monday Night Football, I do always feel like George Kittle has pretty big games in prime time. I don't know if that's real or just I feel like he stands out more in those games. I think he's kind of a performer. He really likes he has a big personality, so I think he tries to get the ball more in those situations. Now, depending on how the Aaron Banks, Trent Williams, those injuries are. I don't know if Kyle will have him in to block more, but I am going to be interested to see. Everyone calls Kyle a genius, and I have a ton of respect for him. So I think that the game plan will be a lot better this coming week than it was in game. And I was disappointed in his in game adjustments last week. How do you feel about Kyle and maybe the guys who might step up for any injured guys coming into this Vikings game?
When you're saying the in-game adjustments, are you saying Kyle himself or who? Are you saying a player?
Yeah, I felt like Kyle didn't get like he didn't utilize Kittle. He didn't get any touches. I know that they tried to have I think Ray take over for that Debo role because in the beginning we saw Debo get immediate handoff
Injury?
and
Yeah.
pass, and then he got injured, and then right after that Ray was in. Now Ray there was a play where it was wide open for a touchdown, and instead of going the way he should have gone, Ray ran straight into Trent Williams. And then I think I was seeing on Twitter, I think he made comments after the game that he was not prepared as much as he should have been, which I found kind of interesting because then Kyle Juszczyk went on the Richard Sherman podcast and talked about how Kyle Shanahan has told his players that because he's so busy being a head coach and a play caller, that he is really grateful that he has this veteran team because he doesn't feel like he needs to get on them as much. But in hindsight, maybe he should be getting on some of these at least backups and making sure that they are prepared and maybe the starters are doing everything they need to do every week. But it did seem it seemed like when you looked at Jordan Mason in his pass protection and kind of basically anytime he wasn't running the ball, he looked confused. And Ray they stopped utilizing him after he made multiple mistakes when they tried to first switch to him. Now I do have confidence that this week, if those guys are out, that the backups are definitely preparing because once you get embarrassed like that, I feel like it wakes you up and you're like, oh, I never can let that happen again. But yeah. What did you think about? Did you hear Kyle Shanahan or Kyle Juszczyk make those comments from Kyle Shanahan? And what do you think about his trust that he has in these players to kind of maybe regulate themselves? And do you think maybe this game made him feel like he has to step in more?
Yeah, I mean, I heard Shanahan's comments, did not hear Juszczyk's, but Shanahan essentially said after the game how he's going to trust his players, but he's also going to trust the trainers, and that was the case with Trent Williams. Williams battled through a lot of pain, he said after the game, but he didn't want to put the team or he didn't want to put backup Jalen Moore into that position. And so, yeah, I mean, that's why he played. Overall, in the adjustment period for Shanahan, I mean, I think the main gripe with me for Shanahan was one series of play call. Well, there were two different things, but the primary thing was the second to last series where the 49ers had the ball up one with over 3 minutes left. Thought you could have gotten, a first down there running the football, trying to burn the clock because, I mean, the passing game was struggling. And so I thought with a guy like Jordan Mason, I understand, he hasn't seen as many carries. He only saw 5 in the game, but he's a guy who they've tabbed as a closer in the past. And I thought, if he gets some carries there, you try and get a first down, you're able to run the clock down, you're able to win this game. Unfortunately, they only took 16 seconds off the clock. And and then Kyle Shanahan ends up punting. I mean, regardless, it doesn't matter because they got the ball back and they were able to put themselves in field goal position. They ultimately did not miss, but I didn't mind necessarily Kyle Shanahan's adjustments. The reason that I said that they say that is because I thought this game was winnable, regardless with the way that with the way things were game planned, the way things were schemed. There were open receivers all day long. It's just unfortunately a matter of accuracy in this game with Brock Purdy. You talk about the Christian McCaffrey miss deep downfield. You talk about the interception where Ayuk was open on that play. You talk about even the Ayuk drop, right? That could have been a touchdown. There are several plays in this game that could have ultimately changed the outcome of this game that you don't expect the 49ers to generally miss. And that's why I don't blame Kyle Shanahan as much, because I thought there was a chance you could have put even 30 points on the number one defense who only allows 15 points a game. I thought there was a chance you could put 30 points. If you're putting that many points on a defense of this caliber, I think you should be able to win. You're going to be able to win this game. And so that's where I think I'm more disappointed. I think it was more of an executional mishap this week. But again, the other part is the injuries. I mean, this is why I thought this game was very important for Brock Purdy. This was his first test, really. Can you carry the team on your shoulders? You don't have Christian McCaffrey. You don't have Debo Samuel. You still have ample amount of, you still have Brandon Ayuk. You still have George Kittle. You still have an ample amount of guys that you can that are around you. But could you carry this team? And unfortunately, the answer was no. In this game, that was the case. We're going to see how he bounces back on Monday against the Minnesota Vikings, and he's definitely going to get some opportunities in close games where he's going to be asked to, carry the load again. But in this week, I thought that answer was no.
I agree. And the thing is, even if Debo and Christian McCaffrey sit out, if you compare the offensive weapons on the 49ers, George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, even with how well, I know he messes up in pass production sometimes, but Jordan Mason is running the ball. Elijah Mitchell, since he's healthy, usually does well when given a good amount of carries and is able to get into rhythm. I still think they have better offensive weapons than the Vikings starting offensive weapons without Justin Jefferson. So I feel pretty confident that the 49ers and that that Brock Purdy will be able to bounce back and that Kyle Shannon will be able to scheme guys open to kind of react to that pressure. Um, do you have any other key takeaways that you think that will stand out for the 49ers and their ability to win the game? And we're gonna also talk about keys to victory for the Vikings, because last week we did not do that with the Browns, because we did, but then we kind of chuckled and talked about how it wouldn't be possible. So I wanted to ask you, I know their defensive line is struggling a little bit with their injuries, but Danielle Hunter is really good. I'm sure that they're going to line him up against that right side. Or I think you even said if Trent Williams is injured, that could be a problem. So, what are keys to victory for the Vikings, in your opinion? How would they uh, re cause Brock Purdy to look shaky again for a second time?
Find a way to be balanced. I think the 49ers, if you look at it off defensively, the 49ers are good against one-dimensional teams. They're good against these passing attacks that don't really have a run game, because it just creates a lot of different opportunities for you defensively when you don't have to consistently sell out against the run. Minnesota has not been a good run team, but I think they got to find a way to be balanced in this one to a degree, not just fully rely on Kirk Cousins. I also think you need to be able to capitalize on some of the big play opportunities. In order to beat the 49ers, you're going to need some big plays to occur. And you just saw how their run game played, but I think the big plays are obviously going to come in the passing game for this one. They got a lethal weapon in Jordan Addison, a first-round pick, who can be a downfield threat. You got KJ Osborne as well. It's still a downgrade, obviously, with Justin Jefferson out of the fold, but I do think that they've got to find a way to get some big play opportunities going and things like that. And I would say the other thing is probably trying to get the ball out of Kirk Cousins' hands a little quicker. That's something that they implemented last week. He's actually a guy who normally hold on to the ball a little longer. It's a thing due to two reasons. One, he throws the ball at a deeper average depth of target. He throws the ball down the field a lot. And two, there's a lot of play action run in Minnesota. Play action plays usually take a little bit of longer to assemble and things like that. But last week, I believe it was 2.74 seconds his time to throw, much lower than his 2.87 seconds, which is his norm. So they tried to throw the ball a little quicker, get the ball a little quicker without Justin Jefferson in the fold, and it was a shorter average depth of target, only 6.6 yards, which is pretty low, which meant, he was throwing the ball short of the sticks, trying to get the ball out quicker and trying to work in space. Minnesota only scored 21 points. That's the thing. I don't know how much Minnesota is going to be able to score in this one if they're going to incorporate that strategy, but I don't know if they have a choice trying to work against the 49ers defense and their pass rush. So I think overall, you look at it, there are a lot of different factors that go along into this one. Minnesota, I think, though, right now, it's create pressure on Brock Purdy, make him uncomfortable. That's the defensive thing. Offensively, find a way to remain balanced and take some deep shots.
I like that. I could see Danielle Hunter causing some issues in the backfield for Purdy, maybe rattling him, and then maybe that could get in his head because he could realize, okay, I'm rattled again. I was just rattled. So really throw off Brock Purdy. Maybe if CMC isn't playing, he doesn't have his safety blanket, and then it's interesting that the Vikings were trying to do so much play action when they run the ball so ineffectively. You would think that defensive coordinators would or the yeah, defensive coordinators would not really react to play action there. I wonder if with Wilkes though, because he has kind of played defense where he gives up, he lets you kind of methodically go down the field. Like I think he's tried to protect the deep ball. I wonder if he'll cover Kirk Cousins differently with that change of strategy from the Vikings and with them not having Justin Jefferson. I hope that he does. I think it would be smart to um, make sure to make them walk down the field instead of just covering the deep throws because I don't think they have too many offensive weapons to make too many explosive plays. Obviously, you're going to get burned every now and then, but I think that the way for the Vikings to win would be to limit the 49ers offensive scoring to like around the 20 to early 20s and to try to methodically score themselves. Like in order to win, I think it would have to be a lower scoring game. So I think Steve Wilkes should try to prevent them from doing that.
No, I agree. I think that's a good take.
Really quickly, we've touched on it when it comes to strategies and which team could win. A giant problem for the 49ers would be if Christian McCaffrey was sitting, Debo was sitting, Trent Williams was sitting, and Aaron Banks was sitting. All of those players did not practice yesterday. Now, it was the first practice of the week because of the Monday night game. So some of those people could just be resting because of travel. It'll be interesting to see who is limited and who goes. Isaiah Oliver was also limited yesterday, which is terrifying because if he was to not go, worst case scenario, that would be Ambry Thomas back there. So, how do you feel about these injuries? If you were Kyle Shanahan, would you sit certain players, especially because US Bank Turf Field or US Bank Stadium has turf field that has caused a lot of injuries this year? Justin Jefferson, we were just talking about, he got his foot stuck and ended up injuring his hamstring. Last week, Travis Kelsey injured his foot on the field. And, oh yeah, Mike Williams for the Dolphins tore his ACL on the field. So, um, the Vikings have actually came out and said that they're going to be replacing the field at the end of the year, but the 49ers are playing on it next week. I'm kind of thinking, okay, with Debo, it's a shoulder injury. That's maybe you can play through that if it's a pain tolerance thing. But if you're Trent Williams, if you're Kyle Shanahan, do you want him planting his foot on that turf, really trying to step into his ankle? Are you sitting anyone? Are you going? Like, if it's a pain tolerance thing, are you going? Or do you feel hesitant? I know a lot of people, myself included, have talked about potentially sitting Christian McCaffrey for 2 weeks and having him come out totally healthy. Doesn't seem like Kyle Shannon is thinking that way because when asked about Christian McCaffrey's usage, he said that he loves how much he's been utilized. But how are you feeling about these injuries so far? Obviously, earlier on in the week, with the game not being until Monday.
Yeah, they're a concern. They're definitely a concern. I mean, we'll go in order. We'll start with Christian McCaffrey. I think oblique injuries are huge. I think that they are, undervalued. I don't think people really understand how hard it is to play with an oblique injury. And that is why if I'm the 49ers, I'd probably sit Christian McCaffrey this week. I wouldn't even be surprised if they try and sit him through the bye week. They play Cincinnati next week, I believe, at home, and then they have a bye week. I wouldn't be surprised if they sit Christian McCaffrey for 2 consecutive games, despite him being as integral as he is to the offense. I think the biggest injury, though, is Trent Williams. I've dubbed Christian McCaffrey as the most valuable player on this team, but the player that you don't want to lose the most on this team is Trent Williams. The reason is the drop-off at left tackle from Trent Williams to Jalen Moore is significant, and I think that also puts your quarterback at risk. I think that that's an issue as well. You go back, I mean, an example I point to is the 2020 game. Jimmy Garoppolo got drilled against the Jacksonville Jaguars when Jalen Moore had to come back in. I mean, that's just one example. You just don't want your backup quarterback, or you don't want your starting quarterback, the guy who you believe is your franchise guy, getting mauled on his blind side, especially. And so I think Williams is the big one. He noted he was playing through a ton of pain. Probably a high ankle sprain, or not high, sorry, a low ankle sprain is what it seems. But I mean, it's a lot of pain. The good thing is that Trent, I don't think he'll practice this week, which means Jalen Moore should get all of the first team reps. Trent's a guy who you can just have him go on game day if he feels he can go. I wouldn't expect him to practice this week. I think it'd just be a rehab week. You give Jalen Moore all the first team reps, try and get him acclimated in case he needs to go. And if he does, he goes. But if not, You see if Trent plays on game day. Debo Samuel, he has a shoulder issue, obviously. This is one where you do want to nurse. You don't want it to get worse because they can linger at times, but I think he's the least of the three concerns between the injuries. Wouldn't be surprised if he goes on Monday.
I completely agree. If I was Kyle, I would hopefully lean towards playing Debo, having him be that yak guy, the short little dump off guy. In if Christian McCaffrey is sitting, he can take some carries along with Elijah Mitchell and Mason. I think it'll be smart also just to get Kyle Shannon in a rhythm with those other running backs. But yeah, like what happened in last year in 2021, Debo can definitely take over in that running back role if he is needed to as well. He's been very effective with the ball in his hands. I personally, and it's scary, right? Because you don't want to lose a game because you're in competition with the Eagles. You want that number one seed. But I think I would strongly consider sitting Trent Williams this week if there's any risk of re-injury, because on that turf when you're planting, because when you think of offensive linemen, they're putting all their weight because you have to like ground and then try to defend another like 300-pound man from pushing you back. So your ankles are like taking so much force. And with that field, I can just we're saying that how vital he is. And I just feel the disappointment that would happen if he's, planting and accidentally gets a high ankle sprain because he twists his ankle wrong because he can't totally stabilize it, or even a knee injury could happen that way because if your lower body isn't stable, you're going to be compensating with other parts of your body. And if anything happened that held him out for longer than a game and for the most important part of the season, that would be way more detrimental than trying to scheme, with Jalen Moore for the Vikings game. But, you are right. I have hesitation saying that because we're saying that now. But if Jalen Moore's in there and Trent Williams, could have fought through injury and Brock Purdy gets a sack and now it's Sam Darnold season, I'm going to feel kind of dumb for suggesting sitting him. So it's definitely, I'm glad I'm not the coach because it seems like a hard decision to
That's a
make.
tough one.
But
It's definitely injuries are always the tough ones.
yeah. Now, are you worried about Aaron Banks, who also didn't practice? Because that would be scary if multiple offensive linemen were injured for the game. He had an ankle and he did not practice yesterday.
Yeah,
Obviously, practice hasn't started yet today, but that's um,
I don't take
concerning.
too much stock in the first day. I mean, I'm
Okay.
not concerned. I think it's one to monitor for sure. But Aaron Banks was on the injury report last week, I believe, with the bicep injury as well. So I would assume
Yeah.
you're trying to give him as much time off as possible to heal. And so this week, I believe he was on with an ankle injury, which
Yeah.
wasn't the case last week. So I mean, it's another thing you got to
Probably
monitor.
not.
But
Yeah. He
even
stayed in the game the whole time. So hopefully
yeah.
nothing too
So we'll see how it goes, but it might just be one of the rest days overall for him.
um, someone in the comments said something about female insults, but I didn't see that. So sorry about that. Okay, really quick, I'm going to go to this guy's comment. Still want Cordell. He gives us a true versatile running back option behind Christian McCaffrey, running back, wide receiver, all that depth. That kind of trend, I'm reading that comment because it kind of transitions us into trade rumors. I was reading your article earlier. There was definitely some guys that stuck out to me while we're talking about injuries as well and depth, different guys that we would need. I wanted to start off, since we're covering the Vikings game, potentially if the 49ers win on the plane ride home, they could just pick up Daniil Hunter and take him with them. It would be really nice if they could trade for him right now, because then they could definitely sit Trent Williams and they wouldn't have to worry about anything. But I don't think the Vikings will do that. I was seeing that I think that the Vikings get a third round comp pick if they keep him.
Yeah,
So I think it would take a second round comp pick to get him. But the 49ers do have a first round pick finally. They have obviously picks in all the other rounds as well. He's 30 years old, so that's kind of problematic. He would not, you know, not that that's old, but for football players, something to note. Also, he would be a 1 year rental, so you'd have to pay him or let him go. However, we keep talking about, like, when we're talking about the importance of Jake Moody and maybe bringing in someone else or Brock Purdy's accuracy, like, the 49ers made all-in moves for this year. This is the year that they should be chasing the Super Bowl. Quarterback play around the league has looked really bad. Other teams have looked the 49ers have looked like either the best or one of the best teams, even with their loss against the Browns in the league. This is a year that they should be going all 100% out to win a Super Bowl. If they win it, they're not going to, it's not going to matter that it was only a 1-year rental. So how do you feel about Danielle Hunter? He currently has 8 sacks, tied for the first in the league with TJ Watt. Looks like a really good player. And if you could get someone who's, giving that much production for only a second round pick, I actually think it's something that the 49ers would be interested in. I know they just got Randy Gregory, but I feel like the 49ers have never felt like they've had too many defensive linemen. So how do you
Yeah,
feel about Hunter?
Danielle Hunter's a stud. I mean, Danielle Hunter's a very good player, and this was never like not known. You know, in the offseason, he was floated around in trade requests and things like that, but it was primarily because of his contract situation. They were in disagreement, but the Vikings and Hunter ended up getting a contract done. The base salary is around $10 million. I would expect the team to probably, or maybe even the Vikings would be willing to pick it up if they got bigger compensation. It would probably be around a second round pick, I would assume. I don't think Danielle Hunter gets a first round pick because he's an expiring deal. He's also already 28, turning on 29. And so I don't think that going into his age 29, age 30 season, you're going to see Danielle Hunter get that much value in return. Wouldn't be surprised if he's traded. The one thing I will say, though, is I don't think it'll be the 49ers. The reason being, I think they do trust the group that they have right now. You already see Randy Gregory out snapping a guy like Drake Jackson in the defensive line room. And while the concept of going all in is important, I also think that it might be a misevaluation of resources if they're going after a guy like Danielle Hunter after they went after a guy like Randy Gregory. You didn't trade much at all for Randy Gregory. That's don't get me wrong. I mean, you traded basically a 6th round pick, or sorry, a pick swap of 6 and 7 picks, and you're not paying much money at all for him. But I just don't think that they're going to look at that position, at least for a win now piece like Danielle Hunter. They might look for a smaller level piece like they did back in 2020, 2021, potentially with some team control. That's the thing I've been hinting at. And Danielle Hunter could obviously be in the cards. I just don't envision that being the move for the 49ers. I think other teams would be willing to pay more, just given that they might have a bigger need at pass rush, whereas the 49ers have 4 guys who they probably trust, well, probably even 5, including Javon Kinlaw, as a pass rusher in those defensive fronts, to where I don't think that if they acquired Danielle Hunter, I just don't think there's going to be enough room to provide the guys that they want to give snaps enough snaps.
Okay, I love that. I love that evaluation. When we're talking about maybe guys who would be more needed on this team, then going back to the injury, I was talking about Isaiah Oliver being limited yesterday. We are crossing our fingers that he is playing in this game, because once again, Ambry Thomas is the guy who comes in when he goes out, and every time Ambry Thomas has been in the game this year, he's literally immediately given up a touchdown, which is sad because he showed promise his rookie year. I feel bad. I feel like I'm picking on him just every time like he comes on the field. I feel like as fans we're like, why is he here, guys? Come on, we all know this. So when talking about depth in the secondary and Isaiah Oliver potentially being injured, a different guy that has been mentioned is Jalen Johnson in Chicago. He is younger. He's 24 years old, has a PFF grade, and I know that people have their opinions on PFF, but has a PFF grade of 84.1, top 10 in coverage. Can you talk to us about Jalen Johnson and maybe the probability that the 49ers could be interested in him? I've seen that he's done tryouts with multiple teams, the 49ers not being one of them yet. But I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about him and maybe that position being more important to get depth behind.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you talk about Jalen Johnson, he's a guy who was at the top of my list just because a lot of people pointing at Pat Surtain. I just don't think he gets moved. I think that the price is going to be too high, and I also think Denver views him as a building block and, a guy who Sean Payton doesn't seem like a guy who wants to go into a full-blown rebuild, and I think that they're going to try and build around Surtain on that defense. But other guys that they involve Jalen Johnson, and Jalen Johnson's a guy who's coming on an expiring deal. I think he's a guy who you could watch out at corner. I think corner is a position where 49ers might, just under the radar be calling in on certain people. I think Johnson's definitely going to be one, if not already. I think he's a guy who they'll definitely be interested in, just because he plays that press man scheme. He's a good outside corner, and I think that for the value that he'll provide, I think that he could not only be a building block now, but also for the future. You move Lenore back into the nickel, and that's your best three corner alignment. Lenore is a good outside corner, but he's also a solid nickel, and I think the 49ers might prefer him there overall, and that might be something that they look into.
I love that. And what did you? I don't think I wrote it down. What did you say you thought it might take to get a guy like Jalen Johnson? He's younger. He's performed pretty well. I think. Oh, maybe you said they would receive a. They're expected to receive a 4th-round pick if they hold on to him. So probably a 3rd-round pick at the least. Now, also, Philadelphia has injuries. I did see that they were looking into Buda Baker, but they could also be looking into a guy like Jalen Johnson. Dallas and Pittsburgh have also been rumored to be involved in getting him. So there might be some competition, and that could also drive up his price a little bit. But definitely would be a smarter trade prospect to go after when it comes to allocating resources than a guy like Pat Surtain. I agree with you. I don't even think that the Broncos would be open to it. But even if they would, the capital that it would take to get a guy like him just seems unrealistic right now. The 49ers are going to want to keep that 1st-round pick. But with a guy like Jalen Johnson, it should potentially take a 3rd-round
I would
pick.
assume it would be, 2 or 3 is where my price I would assume would be. Maybe a 2, understanding that there might be a lot of suitors because he might be the best corner on the market. So it might be a 2, but for the 49ers, a 2 is an early 3, like a late 2, early 3. It's in the similar range. San Francisco has also shown they don't mind trading that 2. They did it obviously for the McCaffrey deal, and Johnson would be a guy who they'd probably re-up for another contract after he's through.
Okay, I love that. Really quick, also, I don't want to go through every guy that you mentioned, but offensive line, we talked about there being some injuries there. Now, obviously, the best offensive linemen in the world aren't going to be available right now. But a guy that I saw people talking about was Garrett Bowles from Denver. He's only allowed 1 sack this season so far, and he has a fairly high PFF grade of 78.8 or 72.8. So he's done pretty well in Denver, at least grading wise. Denver has just struggled overall as a team. The only problem with him is, one, it's not for sure that he's up for trade. I think it might be more of a, like, if Denver does do like a fire sale thing where they're just trying to get rid of people and start rebuilding. Also, he does make $16 million next year, which could affect re-signing Ayuk. Now, the 49ers, I don't really understand exactly how this works because math was not, I studied psychology in school. So after stats, I just never looked at any sort of math equation ever. But don't the 49ers have like $41 million in cap right now? So
Yeah, they got about
I feel like they should be
million.
able to sign Ayuk and get this guy if they wanted. Now, I don't know if the guy's worth it, but how do you feel about Garrett Bowles? Would that affect Ayuk? Do you think the 49ers are interested in that? Or do you think at this point in the season, even though maybe they don't have the best offensive line, I think sometimes people talk about like the offensive line meshing together and over time they get better. So maybe they don't want to add someone mid-season. What's your feelings on adding an offensive lineman, and do you have anyone that you've been looking out for?
Yeah, I think adding an offensive lineman, I think Garrett Bowles would be interesting. I do have a few concerns. One is the one that you mentioned. I mean, the money. He's owed 14 million, or sorry, his cap hit this year is 17.8 million. The base salary is around 13.75 million, and so he's owed a good amount of money. He's also owed 16 million next year, which is the final year of his deal. He's going into his age 32 season next year, and the money is not guaranteed. So, I mean, it's a non-guaranteed contract, but, that usually means that you're going to have to do something. You're going to have to extend him. You're going to have to restructure that deal or something like that. As for the 42 million in cap space, I mean, the 49ers have a ton of cap space, but the reason they had a ton of cap space is because they're positioning themselves for next season, where you're going to not only have to deal with the Ayuk extension at some point, which could also lower his cap hit because he's on a 5th-year option, but they have 42 million in cap space right now. That goes to 0. They're over the cap so much that it goes to near zero when you start next year. And I mean, the restructures and stuff can kick in and things like that, but it's because Nick Bosa's contract and other contracts who you've already restructured do significantly increase. And so I don't know if the 49ers can necessarily afford it unless they continue to push money back in the future, which is a possibility. But I think Bowles is interesting in that he provides you a tackle option. But one other thing though is it's very hard to integrate offensive linemen in the middle of the season, and especially in a scheme like the Shanahan scheme. And he's played on the left side throughout his career. He hasn't played right tackle, and
Okay. Yeah.
he'd have to move him to right tackle because you're not moving Trent. And so,
Yeah.
that's something that he'd have to consider. Would he be willing to play right tackle after playing left for so long? I mean, he's going to be traded, so I don't know if he necessarily has a choice. But that's another thing where you'd probably want to have that conversation if he'd go to right tackle.
Okay, perfect. Do you have any offensive linemen besides him that you've been keeping your eye on, or do you think that keeping that congruency within the guys that they currently have is probably just the best bet for the 49ers this season?
Yeah, I mean, I think a guy who I think you could think about is Andre Dillard. He hasn't played well. He hasn't played that well in Tennessee. He got benched recently. But if you're talking about an offensive tackle, he might be a slight upgrade over Colton McKivitz, and he might also not be that expensive. You're trying to look for bargains and things like that. If I was to be a betting man, I don't think they make a single move on the offensive line. But Dillard's a guy who you could go after. He has 2 years left on his deal. 9.5 million next year, 12 million in cap the year after that. But not as many, not much guarantees. Only 1 million total of that total money is guaranteed. He's an option, but I don't think the 49ers go at it. I think they might maybe entertain it, but I also don't know if the upgrade is good enough to where you warrant trading away
Yeah.
trading away a piece when you're likely going to cut him after the year.
Okay, that's I agree with that. I think that it's probably because I was looking at guys like Lyle Collins and stuff, but coming off all those injuries with the
Yeah.
49er injury luck, it just seems not smart. I feel like sticking with the guys that they have right now, if hopefully those two ankle injuries from yesterday weren't that big of a deal, is probably the 49ers' best bet. Um, I know that some people were talking about linebackers. There's Frankie, I don't know how to say his last name, Lou.
Frankie Louvu.
Yeah.
Hmm.
He's 27 years old. He has 27 tackles, 4 sacks, and he's a free agent at the end of the season, so it would be a rental. Now he does have familiarity with Steve Wilkes. I think if Greenlaw's able to play, that this isn't even something that they really consider. But I just feel like the absence of Greenlaw was felt so much. Oren Burks is a great player, but I think he's a little bit more suited for special teams. There was a lot of missed tackles and just not tackling as hard as when you have a guy like Dre Greenlaw. Now I don't know if bringing a guy like Frankie in is going to totally replace that. So I think fans should more just be hopeful that Dre Greenlaw is good and they could potentially be bringing in a guy like Frankie for backup. But I mean, I'm kind of with you. I think if they are looking for a guy, it's going to be more just that Jalen Johnson corner position. But did you have any thoughts on Frankie and on the 49ers potentially bringing him in?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you look at that move, I think that you want to look at linebackers who I don't think that they're going to impact you as much this season, but you want to look at linebackers who kind of impact you a lot in the future. And so Frankie Louvu might be one of those guys, but he's a guy who's an unrestricted free agent, and I mean his salary isn't high. If the cost is cheap, maybe you go ahead and make the move. He's your number three, but I don't know if they're going to go ahead and trade for a linebacker that is on an expiring contract, understanding they probably won't have the resources to sign him back in the offseason. So that's the way that I'm looking at it. Want to give a shout out to my guy Chris. Always appreciate
Yeah,
him.
I just
But
saw, I just saw
yeah,
that.
but that's my thoughts. He's a young guy. He's a solid player, but I just don't know if San Francisco is the best fit. Understanding he won't have as big of a role, and it's not a guy who you can necessarily groom for the future potentially once Greenlaw leaves.
I completely agree. And Chris, we gotta chat on him because I love him so much. He's been so helpful and pivotal. He's the only reason why I'm currently doing this because he's been so helpful. But he said that Burks has been playing extremely well, and he's not just a special teams guy. So maybe I need to fix my expectations a little bit. I think it's probably just unfair also that I'm comparing someone to Greenlaw. I just really feel like he puts the fear in other teams. Like I think he genuinely dissuades people from wanting to run the ball. So but I agree. I don't think if the 49ers were going to spend resources before the trade deadline, I think it will be on a guy like Jalen Johnson. I think that would be their smartest bet, is fortifying that corner uh, secondary position. That way we're not relying on Ambry Thomas. Okay, so really quickly, and then we're going to do our over-unders. But do you have any teams that you're looking out for on Sunday? The Seahawks are playing the Cardinals, which maybe kind of be interesting for the NFC and the implications that has. Um, the Rams and the Eagles. Any of those games are you looking out for on Sunday? Are you going to be watching any football, or are you just waiting until Monday?
No, I mean, I always got to turn football on. I definitely gotta be watching. There are a couple of interesting games on the slate. I think this weekend. But overall, I mean, you look at it. I think 49ers obviously are going to be on my mind on Monday. But until then, I
I
mean,
think the Eagles versus the Dolphins will
the
be
Eagles
an
Dolphins.
interesting
That's Sunday
game.
night, right? I believe that's Sunday night. I mean,
Yeah,
that one's
yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
I think there are a couple
One,
of
because
interesting ones.
like we want the Eagles to lose, but two, the Dolphins have gained so much hype recently. Um, but then they kind of had their ass handed to them when they played the Bills. So I'm kind of interested in how the 49ers, they just talked about going up against a real test in that Browns defense. I'm interested in seeing the Dolphins, if they can, not only if they can win, but even if they don't win, can they stick around against a team like the Eagles? Like, are they really going to be contenders when it comes playoff time? Could they be in the Super Bowl, or is it kind of more just that they've beat up on poor teams? And also just, the Mike McDaniel, we always want him to win. And if they win, then the Eagles lose, and that's great for the 49ers because we want the 49ers to get that number 1 seed. So I think that will be an interesting game, or a game I'm interested um in watching. Do you have any?
No, I agree. I think that one's good. I think the Chargers game as well, Sunday afternoon against the Chiefs. I think that one's always going to be a fun one. So go for it.
Yeah. Are you nervous at all about the Seahawks in the NFC this year, going against where the 49ers don't go against them until later on in the season, but they have to play them twice, and they have, when we're talking about man coverage, they have maybe not the defensive the front four that the Browns have, but they do have really good secondary players, and they've been playing really well in that back end defense.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that the Seahawks are a solid team. Whereas do I think they are contenders with the 49ers? I mean, I'm not going to say no because I do think they're going to be like in the playoff race for sure and potentially,
Mhm.
somewhere in that 5 to 7 range in the wild card, but I don't think that they're going to win the division. So I won't say no, but I don't think they're as high of a contender as the 49ers.
Okay, perfect. And I do think that they'll beat the Cardinals. Did you hear Kyler Murray is practicing, but he's not close to playing yet. But I do think that they'll play. So we're gonna do the last thing uh, before we end the show today, and that's gonna be the over under game. We're gonna go through it pretty quickly today. Last week we did terrible. Both of us did really bad. We lost pretty much all of them, but I did beat Rohan because Brock Purdy did not throw for 200 yards, which was hilarious because both of us sat here and laughed and talked about how I should have made it higher because that was such a low bar. And we talked about how Rohan was definitely going to win that one. And then the Browns held him to 125 yards, which is their average. They're doing kind of historic things over there on defense. It sucks for them that their offense is so terrible, but also I don't have any sympathy for the Browns because they put themselves in this position. But so for this week, I'm gonna test you on, because we were talking earlier about injuries. I'm gonna go over or under point 0.5 touchdowns for Christian McCaffrey. Is he gonna keep doing his record of a touchdown? I think it would be 16 or 15 straight games if he does play and get a touchdown in this game. Do you think this is kind of like two questions in one? Because if you say over, then you think he's playing.
Okay. So are you saying over on like them playing or not playing, or what do you mean?
I'm doing over and over or under point 0.5 touchdowns for Christian McCaffrey.
Got it. Okay. I'll say under because I don't think he plays.
Okay. All right. I'm also going to go under. Now, If he's
Which
not
is kind of
playing,
sad because we've been accustomed to
I
the
know.
McCaffrey touchdowns
I've
and
been
things like that.
telling everyone if you can bet to always bet. I wonder. I don't think. I feel like they don't care about that stuff actually enough to do that. But I wonder. I wonder if they would get him in literally to score his touchdown and then take him out. I just feel like Kyle Shannon has no restraint. What I just described is like me with chocolate. I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna have one square and then I eat the whole bar. I feel like if Christian McCaffrey is suited up to play, Kyle will not be able to hold himself back. So I think that the only way that they can have him out there is if he's not playing, because I don't think moderation is something that Kyle feels with Christian McCaffrey. So
Yeah,
I'm gonna also go under, but it would be hilarious if he just keeps breaking that record and goes out and does do that. So if he's sitting, I think maybe they will potentially rely on some other players. So what about over or under 0.5 touchdowns for Debo Samuel? Do you think he's going to play? Do you think he will take over? He could
I
also,
think
and
that
I'm
this is
not specifying between catching and rushing too. So this could also be a rushing touchdown for Debo.
I think that for me, I will Debo. You know what? I'll go over. I'll go over. If I'm not going McCaffrey over, I'll go over. I think he plays, and I think he gets a touchdown, maybe even in the rushing way.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like you just talked yourself into it. Like I saw you saying under, and then you were like, no. I agree. Okay, how about Ayuk? Do we think that Ayuk is going to get over or under? I'm going to put zero point 0.5 touchdowns.
Ayuk, I'll go over as well. I think both of them will get one touchdown. I don't know if we've seen that this year, but I think both of them will get one touchdown.
Okay, and our last guy for um, our different weapons that we were talking about, you were really confident in the over about this last week, and I wish you were correct because potentially the 49ers would have won. Over or under George Kittle, we're going to say 6 targets.
No, I'm going on the
No?
under for Kittle for everything. I'm going on the under for
Oh,
Kittle. 6 targets,
really?
I can't. Yeah, I'm going on the under for Kittle. Kittle sold me last week, so I'm going on the under for Kittle.
Okay, I'm gonna go over, but I'm gonna go over in like a Kyle being spiteful way. Like he was asked too much about it this week, and so I feel like he's gonna be like, "Fine, you want to get him involved? I'll throw him the ball, whatever." Like I just feel like Kyle is. I could also see him giving him no targets and be like, "This is what you get for asking him about Kittle." But no, I'm expecting, especially with Christian McCaffrey, I think he'll sit. I'm not 100% sure on how I feel or how much Debo Samuel will be involved. So I'm hopeful that it will be a big Kittle game, and I'm going to predict that he gets more than 6 targets. I also want to say I think he's going to get a touchdown. George Kittle in primetime games, okay? That's not a part of it. I'm not asking you about touchdowns, but that's going to be a little. If we're tied, I win because I think he gets a touchdown. Jordan Mason, over under 1 or 0.5, sorry, 0.5 touchdowns. Jordan Mason.
I'll go no. I'll go on the under because I think Debo will get the one rushing one that they get. So I'll go no. I'll go under.
Okay, I'm gonna go over for that. I want to say Jordan Mason. The Vikings aren't very good against the run. I think he will get it. Knowing our luck, it'll be Elijah Mitchell, and I didn't even put him on here. But I'm gonna say over for Mason. What about zero point 0.5 sacks for Randy Gregory for this offense? He did really well in his I think he only played 30% of the snaps last week. Did extremely well, got a ton of pressure, and also a sack. Do you think he will have a sack against Kirk Cousins or someone in this upcoming game? Over under 0.5 sacks for Randy Gregory.
Randy Gregory, I will go. You know what? I'll ride the wave. I'll go over again. I think that 49ers will get him opportunities, so I'll go over again.
Okay, I'm also going over. So far we're agreeing on everything except for Kittle, and you're only not agreeing with me on Kittle because he burned you last week.
Yes.
What about Nick Bosa over under? I want to make this harder. 1.5 sacks. So do you think he's going to get more than one sack?
I think that Nick Bosa over or under a half a sack. Minnesota gets they give up a good amount of sacks. I'll go over. I'll go over for both. I think that he'll get a sack. So yeah, I'll take it.
Okay. and I'm going to need your help wording this because I don't know like how to word it, but Minnesota has had a huge problem with fumbling this year. They have had a ton of turnovers and a ton of fumbles. So I am kind of predicting that the 49ers defense could be practicing their punch outs and really trying to get the ball out this. So, I guess I'll just do that over under, but I want to make it specific, not just not an
Fumble.
interception.
Over under
Fumble.
half a fumble.
Over under Kirk Cousins half a fumble.
Kirk Cousins half a fumble.
Or Vikings. Sorry, Vikings, because running backs.
I have a feeling like they're fumbling at least 70% of their games. I know Kirk had a fumble, I thought, this past week as well.
Yeah.
I mean, the 49ers don't force fumbles that often, but I'll take it just because I think Minnesota is fumble prone this year. So I'll take it. Maybe a strip sack. I'll go with that. A strip sack at some point.
I'm also that would be good to see. This defense I feel like is going to come back with vengeance. I think that they learned from this Brown games. I think I'm going to go over on that as well. Now, just for normal interceptions, over or under 0.5 interceptions for Kirk Cousins.
So you're saying 0.5
throwing the ball to the other team.
I will go under on this one. I think Kirk will fumble, but I don't think he'll throw a pick.
Okay, and we're going to disagree. I think there's going to be a takeaway. I think that he's going to throw an interception. I'm going over. Now, Brock Purdy, over under 0.5 interceptions. He was so perfect, and then you and I cursed him. We both said that he was going to get an interception, and he did. We suck.
I said it.
It was the only thing we got right.
I'll say no. I'll say no for this one. I don't think Minnesota intercepts him.
I agree. I'm going to go under for Brock Purdy. I think he's going to have a bounce back game. Okay. Danielle Hunter, over under 0.5 sacks. For the last one.
Danielle Hunter, over under. I'll go over. I think he'll get the 1 sack. He's got 8 this year, so I'll go over.
Perfect. Okay. I also think that. So you and I agreed on a lot, but we disagreed on Kittle. I went over and you went under. We disagreed on Kirk Cousins interceptions and on a Mason touchdown. So it'll be really nice to come back tomorrow. Not tomorrow. To come back next week and maybe talk about how that ended up going. Do you have any record predictions? I know it's kind of earlier.
Are you saying season record?
No. Sorry. Do you have any score predictions?
Score predictions? I didn't make one yet. I haven't really thought about it, but I do think the 49ers should win this one. The question that I posed yesterday is, do they win this one by 2 scores? Because Minnesota hasn't lost by more than a touchdown yet in this game or this season. Yeah,
close. They keep games.
They keep games close. My only question is, how much can Minnesota really score in this one? And so I don't know if Minnesota scores more than. I don't think they score more than 20 points in this one. I think they score probably around 17 points, maybe 16, 17 points in this game. I just don't see them scoring as much.
I agree. My rough prediction is going to be 27 49ers, 13 Vikings. So I feel like this is going to be a bounce back game. I think the 49ers, they have a good ego to them. I don't think that they want to lay another egg. I think they're going to come out and try to make a little bit of a statement against a really diminished and hurting Vikings team right now. And potentially make them want to start selling ship and giving them Hunter. Okay. Well, I had such a great time with you guys. 49er, this guy's going super over. He thinks 4 to 5 touchdowns. I like that.
Okay.
I love that confidence. Yeah, I picked 27 and part of me is like, oh, I should go higher, but I'm gonna stick with 27 right now for the 49ers. But I had such a good time talking with you, Rohan. I always do. I learned a lot. I really appreciated you kind of breaking stuff down for me earlier. Someone in the comments talked about watching Johnny Dell Football Academy and that he also breaks
he's very good.
Really well.
He's very good.
I love him. I didn't pull up that comment earlier, so before we left, I wanted to give him a quick shout out. I think I mentioned him on our last show. I've definitely mentioned him before. He's like JT O'Sullivan, but instead of just the quarterbacks, he does the entire thing, and he makes it very digestible. It's not super long for more maybe a casual fan like me. I really would recommend him to anyone who wants to learn a little bit more so that we can keep up with Rohan when he's giving us all the insights. But I had such a good time, Rohan. I hope you have a great rest of your Friday. Thank you so much for giving me so much of your time. Everyone, please go follow Rohan. I put all of his information in the description of my stuff. He's always putting out great articles. A lot of those everything that I got about the trade section was from his most, I don't know if it's his most recent, but from an article
Yeah,
that I read from him yesterday. So definitely go check out Rohan and his channel and his writing. Thank
you
you so
should.
much. Okay, thanks everyone. I'll be back later on this week. Please like and subscribe and turn on the bell notification so you know when I'll be back. Thank you.